Fellow Freedom fans, David Allen Carmichael. Yeah, we're going to do this video on prosecuting the prosecutor. That's what our theme is today, prosecuting the prosecutor, to see if it is possible that those who are prosecuting the former president can actually be prosecuted for malicious prosecution. So that's the theme, and here we go. We're going to get silent here for a second while we line up our recording. Fellow Freedom fans, David Allen Carmichael. Preservative Talk Radio, engaging these issues of the day from a constitutional basis, a biblical basis, the basis of right versus wrong. Today we've got an exciting topic. I know everybody's talking about the same thing, but today on Preservative Talk Radio, you're going to get something slightly different. The topic of today is prosecuting the prosecutor. Prosecuting the prosecutor. Is that what should be happening in the mainstream reality? Prosecuting the prosecutor. So is it possible? Is it possible that malicious prosecution is happening in New York City right now, that we're dealing with? That the former United States President Donald John Trump is being prosecuted maliciously. So I'm going to address it today on a constitutional basis, biblical basis, the basis right versus wrong, etc. We're going to read from the law. We're actually going to read from the indictment. Have you actually heard from the indictment yet? You've heard people comment on it, but have you heard it yourself? So I read it today, and I was so impressed about how unimpressive it was. So other people have commented the same way. But there's this one critical feature that all of us together here are going to understand, that there's a critical flaw in this indictment. And we're going to know it by first reading the New York statute with regard to the indictment. The statute that is cited by the indictment, we're going to read it. And we're gonna say, wait a minute, something's missing here. I'm not a legal scholar or anything. I'm just a bumpkin, but I can see that there's some missing piece here. It makes the 34 indictments zero. What is anything times zero? Is zero. So in this indictment, what I've observed is there's a requirement. It's supposed to be indictment times 1 equals indictment. That would be count number 1. And then indictment count number 2 times 1 equals another indictment. If you add those two together, that is count 1 and count 2, you have 1 plus 1 equals 2. However, if you have count 1 indictment times 0, that equals 0. And if you do that 34 times, it still comes out to 0. You see what happens, folks? Eventually, you're going to be able to use algebra. All right? Isn't that great that eventually somebody's actually going to use that stuff? It was mandatory. They forced you into it. And look, I finally found an application for algebra. So let's go ahead and talk about it. We're going to talk about what is, first of all, it hit me, is this malicious prosecution? So, it might be and it might not be. So it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or Donald Trump or George W. or H.W. Bush. It doesn't matter who the man or woman is. What matters is the authority structure of law, justice, and there's certain things that you can't find justice on earth. It's appointed man once to die, then the judgment. Nobody gets away with anything. They may be ultimately pardoned for eternity, But nobody gets away with anything, and we've got to be very careful to not abuse our systems created by men to, let's say, take vengeance on people here on earth. It is actually not the ministry of justice to take vengeance. And we can talk about Romans 13 and things like that. But the purpose is, it's a mechanism. Law and the justice system is a mechanism to preserve society, is to protect you and your life, liberty, and property. It's an incentive. The human system of justice is an incentive for people while on earth, though they care nothing about their internal damnation or reward. There'll be something that, as a matter of nature, would encourage people to either do the right thing or not do the wrong thing, because there will be physical ramifications, consequences that they could face that'll make them physically uncomfortable. A system as justice is so that it could attack the happiness of the depraved. So it's not supposed to reach justice. That can only be done by the ultimate judge, the one to whom we will all have to give an account on the final judgment. So we need to think about that, not to get too spun up and excited and let our factional passions get in the way, but to be as objective as we can. And that's why there's something called due process. It's not perfect. The due process that we can come up with as mankind is never going to be perfect. But we got a duty to do the best we can to apply the due process as objectively as possible, so that we are not being sinners through the power of the government that we've instituted. So again, where you are, this is Nuga Radio. I'm David Allen Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio. We're going to talk about today the malevolent. We're going to talk about maliciousness. So what I'm doing right here is I reached on my shelf, and if you go to my videos, you're going to see behind me a bookshelf with a bunch of if you see my videos, you're going to see a bookshelf with a bunch of different colored books in the background. So I reached up there today, and I pulled off American Jurisprudence. This says Logs and Timber to Marriage. So somewhere between logs and timber and marriage is malice and malicious prosecution. So I can read the law of the land of America regarding malicious prosecution by just reaching up on my law library. Isn't that a blessing? But here we go. I'm going to read to you out of American Jurisprudence what the opening line explaining to us what is malice, because that's the first word, the operative word in this malicious prosecution. Malice is basically no more than a state of mind, citing Watt versus Longston, etc., etc. The common acceptation of the term connotes ill will, hatred, or hostility entertained by one person toward another. Actual malice, or malice in fact, means a positive desire and intention to, listen to this, to annoy or injure another person. So is the prosecutor in New York, is he what he would have to be a malicious prosecutor? He'd have to have an intention to annoy or injure another person, Mr. Trump particularly. So that's something to consider. Going on to the next page. I don't know if you can hear the page flipping, but I thought this was kind of neat too. As a condition of the mind which shows a heart devoid of social consciousness and bent upon mischief, as characterizing an action flowing from any wicked or corrupt motive, as a depraved inclination on the part of a person to disregard the rights of others, which intent is manifested by his injurious acts. So it's clear that if there's a malicious prosecution, to actually prosecute a malicious prosecution, that would be Trump prosecuting the prosecutor. you'd have to prove these intentions or have evidence of an intention. Let's see what else I found here. So it's from any wicked, corrupt motive, as a depraved inclination on the part. Okay, let me just continue. At the prompting of hatred. So this is another element of considering maliciousness. Is it's an unlawful act, but in the doing of it designedly and with preconceived purpose, at the prompting of hatred and revenge. You know, in the Bible it says that we're not supposed to take revenge. It says, I will repay. And I think in old TV shows, they would say, vengeance is mine. You have some crazy looking preacher preaching a message that God was going to take vengeance. Well, that's not the message of the prohibition in the Bible. The message of the prohibition of the Bible is, don't you take vengeance. You're commanded. You're not allowed to take vengeance. So as a prosecutor, even, you're not allowed to take vengeance. As somebody who's a victim of a crime, you're not allowed to take vengeance. You're not allowed to take vengeance. So, at the prompting of hatred and revenge, is somebody acting in the prompting of hatred and revenge? Also something to consider. If he acted wantonly, doing what any man of reasonable intelligence must have known to be contrary to his duty, and purposely prejudicial and injurious toward another, the law will imply malice. Now, what I'm going to have to come back to this later, as I've barked all the elements to you, because think about this. You know, if every prosecution was challenged with a malicious prosecution act or a complaint or action, you'd have prosecutors doing double time. They'd have to be prosecuting somebody on Monday and then defending themselves on Tuesday. So you just got to know that to be able to pull off a claim of malicious prosecution, you have got to have your ducks in an absolute row. So that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to think about this prosecution on former President Trump that's happening in New York. And we're going to have an opportunity to actually read the indictment. And you, as a reasonable mind, you would, of course, you've got a reasonable mind because you're listening to Nuga Radio. It's very clear. It's not a doubt. In fact, you've probably got an edge on the common man if you're listening to Nuga Radio. All right? We haven't taken a survey yet. It's just an observation. So what are the indicators in the Trump case? If to a reasonable mind, that's what we're going to approach today. I'm going to apply my reasoning here, just trying to be objective, right? I've been watching other commenters that are trying to be objective, and they've come to a conclusion that they're not thrilled about what's happening, even if they're of the other, let's say, political persuasion from Mr. Trump. But what are the indicators in the Trump case? There was a campaign promise to get Trump. That's famously known. So, and this occurred to me today. The language, a lot of times we'll hear a phrase, we don't know where the term came from. You ever hear the term trumped up? Now, we know that trumped up is something, charges that are trumped up, that somebody just found a man and they wanted to find something to throw at them as far as charges. So they trumped up charges. Our next generation probably won't know that definition came before the current former president of the United States. Will our future generation ever know that there was something called trumped up charges before Trump? We'll see. We'll see. In fact, that's going to have to be one of those things on the internet. They go, wow, a little known fact is the trumped up charge term came before the trumped up charge. So, or accusations of a trumped up charge. So here's a couple other indicators of the Trump case of whether or not it's legit. The misdemeanors that they're citing have passed the statute of limitations. So, and I also put in my notes, I noticed that there are no charges against the extortionists. So the people that were committing extortion aren't being charged. Conveniently, there's a 5-year felony limitation for extortion charges, and there's a 6-year limitation on the charges that are being brought to Mr. Trump. I'm sure they had to wait at least a year to make sure that they didn't have to prosecute the 5-year felony limit and only the 6-year felony limit. So we're going to come back, Preservative Talk Radio, investigating whether the prosecutor could get prosecuted. So I have about a 2-minute break to look over my notes and to relax a little. And I had to give you my phone number. I had to put it on the screen someday. So here we are. Malicious. So let me go like this. Look at my recording device. So I know this is kind of boring for you video people, but you're operating with me here. After I do 15 minutes, I need to do therapy to my brain. So here we go. And I haven't quite licked. I've got absolutely brand new audio recording equipment or software. So I'm not sure what I'm allowed to do. I was kind of messing with my mouse and moving the play button over, recording button over, and I was kind of messing it up. So rather than do that, we've got another 45 seconds before my next segment kicks in. So now we're waiting. Probably what I ought to do is lower it to a minute, since I've got to fill airtime with my mouth. So what do you think about that? Should we prosecute the prosecutor? There's the question. Should we prosecute the prosecutor? Let's see what we're coming up with next. Should the prosecutor get prosecuted? Question here on Preservative Talk Radio. As we just said a few minutes ago, are there indicators that something is malevolent? Is there something besides pure justice that's happening in New York? I'm going to try to objectively investigate it today. Not having a political passion or preference. The accusation is generally, spoiler here, that records were altered. That's what the accusation is. And the issue of whether or not, we don't know the facts, whether or not somebody had an illicit relationship. I am not a fan of illicit relationships. And you sow the flesh, you reap corruption. You sow the spirit, reap everlasting life. I mean, there are consequences to conduct. But also there are accusations that can be hurled at somebody because it's convenient and they're willing to cut a check. So I don't know the facts of that. But what we're going to try to do is objectively consider what's happening. And my theme of the day is the prosecutor or the prosecution prosecutable? That's what I'm examining today. So I mentioned that the prosecutor on his campaign was in, I'm going to quote something, Mr. Dershowitz has a book out called Get Trump. And he stole the line from somebody who said they were going to get Trump. So we can all use, without permission, we're giving him the benefit of the advertisement. And also we're just using what is now a common reality and phrase in our society is get Trump. So there was a campaign promise, we're going to get Trump. Hire me, get me, vote for me because I'm going to get Trump. I'm going to take possibly vengeance. We're going to get this, what do they call it? The orange guy. We're going to get this guy. So if that was your campaign promise, at least that's one indicator. On the big stack of weight of evidence, there's one little gram on one side of the scale. That the fact that there's associated with these charges, felony charges, because of an accusation that a misdemeanor has occurred. The misdemeanors have passed their statute of limitations. So that's maybe problematic. I think it'll be interesting to see if you can associate something whose statute of limitations is passed. We'll see. So there's no charges against the extortionists. There's a 2-year limitation, statute of limitation for a misdemeanor extortion. There's a 5-year statute of limitations in New York for felony extortion. Let's see what else we're thinking of here. So fraud is a charge. As I said regarding the fraud charge, the statute of limitations for fraud is 6 years, and these charges were brought based on conduct that happened in 2017. So we're just meeting the deadline. Now, that's not an indicator of something being wrong. I've talked to lawyers, and I've had conversations with them about other people's cases, and we all agreed that you pretty much try to use as much time as you can to prepare for the case by utilizing that statute of limitations. Now, me, I don't practice what I've preached on this because I recently sued the United States immediately. But the problem is when you're being injured now and it's not something that you can just hold off, you've got to stop them from continuing injuring you daily. You're on the hook. You got to pretty much make the charges as fast as possible to limit your injury. But if you have the time, you hold off a while. You do some homework. You start gathering witnesses. You might poll your audience and find out what reasonable people think to get a sense of what a reasonably minded jury might decide. So here's these charges. In New York State, the indictment says a person is guilty of falsifying business records in the first degree when he commits the crime of falsifying business records in the second degree, and when his intent to defraud includes an intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission thereof. I'll come back and we're going to analyze this, but it goes on to say, this is New York State statute, criminal statute 175.10. Goes on to say falsifying business records in the first degree is a Class E felony. We're going to find out what that is as well. But in the world of logic, so we've got electronic technicians in our audience, and they know there's something called an AND gate or an OR gate. In an AND gate, every requirement has to be fulfilled. If it says this and that, if all the ands are fulfilled, you got logic level 1 coming in on every gate on an AND gate. You get the logic level 1 out. You've accomplished your mission. You've turned on the switch. But the switch doesn't turn on until every gate, the requirement is being met. The logic level 1 is there for every requirement. So let's look at this. If in an AND gate, that's what we're dealing with in this logic here. And by the way, you're getting ready. That's this kind of conversation I had when I was trying to become a second-class petty officer in the United States Navy. So I had this little conversation, and fortunately, it did really good things for my test. So a person is guilty of falsifying business records in the first degree when, here's the gates here, when he commits the crime of falsifying business records in the second degree. Now, pause there. Second degree tells me that there's qualifiers even for that. I'm not going to get into that detail here. But the other qualifiers, you have to prove that the business records were falsified. What if the information on the records was actually correct? So you've got to prove that the information was not correct, that it's not a standard practice of business. So there's one of the qualifiers. Now here's an and. So falsifying business records in the second degree, comma, and, We have to qualify this. With this intent, oh, you need to qualify intent. You've got to prove intent. There's another thing. When his intent to defraud includes an intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission of one of thereof. So you've got to prove intent, and then to defraud, intent to defraud, and an intent to commit another crime. So it tells me that there's got to be another crime. I'm not a genius in this, and didn't go to law school, but I can connect those dots and go, this is going to be exciting. We're not just going to get this falsifying records challenge. We can watch, court TV and see if they're going to be proving falsifying records. But wait, there's more. We get to actually watch them prove another crime. Oh, this is going to be so good. Now it goes on to say falsifying business records in the first degree is a Class E felony. Oh my goodness. What is a Class E felony? If you just never do the wrong thing, you'll never have to worry about a Class E felony. I'm actually going to read off an example I got from a website. But a Class E felony is sort of like, I was looking in the New York statute, and I noticed that misdemeanor statutes can have imprisonment up to 364 days. So 365 would be more than a year. So a misdemeanor can have imprisonment up to 364 days. A Class E felony is kind of like, okay, now you can have 365 days of jail. It's just above the misdemeanor. However, it's got all the due process that you're regularly going to have. You need an indictment. You need all kinds of other things. So here's a website that I went to. I found, we're going to give them credit, rendlemanlaw.com. It's on the internet talking about this subject. And it says, under the umbrella of Class E felony, there are two further categories, violent felony and not violent felony charges. Obviously, this would be nonviolent. Some nonviolent Class E felony charges include abandonment of a child. That's kind of violent, actually. Promoting a suicide attempt. That's kind of violent. And criminally negligent homicide. While violent felonies include, so those weren't violent. That seems to me it's violent. But nonetheless, those are wrongs in nature. Okay? Those are not manufactured paperwork wrongs. Those are wrong as a matter of, as I said, nature. They're absolute. While violent felonies include persistent sexual abuse. Oh, so persistent. What about sexual abuse? You mean sexual abuse isn't bad unless it's persistent? Oh, whatever. And placing a false bomb or hazardous substance in the second degree, whatever that is. So this, again, is rendlemanlaw.com. And here's a whole list of things that are particularly in New York Class E felonies. Aggravated sexual abuse, criminal mischief, and that they list that as painting significant graffiti onto the wall of a building that doesn't belong to you. Arson in the fourth degree is recklessly damaging someone else's car with a fire you set, for instance. Computer tampering, criminal possession of stolen property, welfare fraud, rape in the third degree, whatever degree that is, falsifying business records it says the fourth degree. It's actually in this stage we're dealing with falsifying records in the first degree is actually a correction, or it must be a modernized statute, is actually when you're got fraud in the second degree, which would be a misdemeanor, and you're committing fraud to cover up a crime, then it becomes the first degree. Criminal sale of cannabis in the third degree, criminal sexual assault in the third degree. I don't know what all the degrees are, but those are the list of the things that would be a Class E felony, which you're going to have at least a 1-year jail sentence. So further consequences of a felony in New York, in addition to the jail sentence, you're likely to face with a Class E felony. And this is where this is the and gate to see whether it qualifies if this indictment is legit. Any kind of felony charge will result in severe consequences that will follow you for the rest of your life. Oh, I'm sorry, I misconstrued what I had here. So these are the ramifications if any one of these 34 are found to be true. Is no longer being allowed to own firearms, No, now somebody with Secret Service protection, it's kind of mitigated a little there. No longer being allowed to vote while incarcerated or on parole. No longer being able to claim welfare. No longer being able to sit on a jury. You know what's excluded? No longer being able to be a candidate for president. So that the possibility of being the president of the United States, notwithstanding the prosecution, we're looking like, I don't know how this is going to work out. This is going to be a very interesting time. It's clearly a very interesting time in our country, because the justice system is basically being is on parade, but it's also being scrutinized right now. What are the limits of the justice system? I'm thinking back in Mr. Comey, from the director of the FBI, when he examined Hillary Clinton's having a server at her own home with higher than top secret classified information. And it was hackable, and there was evidence that it had been hacked. So that was serious, gross, I would say criminal. My observation, being in the military and having read the requirements for securing classified information, and actually being accused in one instance of doing something not completely correct, and I'll tell you that story. But that's criminal negligence. That's it's not just negligence. That's willful, deliberate, ignoring the rules that protect the security of the nation, and understanding the potential consequences, and doing it anyway. And Mr. Comey just said, no prosecutor in his right mind would bring these charges against somebody like that. Now, she was a candidate for president, so you don't want to take their feet out from under them for that purpose. But at the same time, these things were done, again, in a very important non-presidential capacity, and she wasn't prosecuted. So we're examining the justice system now, and it's up to us to keep them accountable to true justice. We'll be right back. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually read the indictment. We're going to think about what that was. We'll think what that says. And I'll probably have to do a thing where I have PowerPoint presentation with all the crime. Okay, that's it. That's the let's see what this is. Okay, consequences. Okay, so we're going to go back. 175.10. All right. So now we're waiting. We have less than a minute. I have two microphones. I have a new microphone. And I have one I can put against the phone and take calls. Fellow Freedom fans, David Allen Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio. Can the prosecutor be prosecuted? Is there any element in this action against the former president of the United States, where the motives of the prosecutor are, is there ill will, hatred, hostility entertained by one person toward another? Actual malice, in fact, means a positive desire, an intention to annoy or injure another person. Are those the motives of the prosecutor? Well, that's another question. What we're going to do next, after we reviewed what does the New York law law is accused of being the violation here that is worthy of a prosecution on charges, on felony charges. So here we are. You're going to get it right now on Preservative Talk Radio. I'm going to read from the indictment. The grand jury of the County of New York, by this indictment, accuses the defendant, that is Donald J. Trump, it's Donald John Trump, in violation of penal law, falsifying business records in the first degree in violation of penal law 175.10. Now, before I go ahead and read this first count, which is just one simple little paragraph, I'm going to go back and read 175.10. Think of the elements here, and then we're going to read the indictment and see if the indictment includes all the required elements. I'm not an expert, but in my reasonable mind, I don't see it. A person is guilty of falsifying business records in the first degree when he commits the crime of falsifying business records in the let's just have them worry about second degree, first degree, third degree, whatever. But he's guilty of this falsifying business records in the first degree when he commits a crime of falsifying business records, and when his intent to defraud includes an intent to commit another crime or to conceal the commission thereof. So you've got to have both. You've got to have another crime for this to be a felony. Now, I would think, this is just me, again, not an expert, all right, but I'm just like anybody else. I can read, and I can make a determination of what something says and what it means, what's the import thereof. So let me reopen this. And here's the indictment. So it says, falsifying business records in the first degree, violation of 175.10 committed as follows. Here's the indictment. The defendant in the County of New York and elsewhere on or about February 14th, 2017, with intent to defraud and intent to commit another crime and aid and conceal the commission thereof. So they're claiming that he did that. There's a crime and a commission of a crime that is intended to be covered. Made and caused a false entry in the business records of an enterprise, to wit, an invoice from Michael Cohen dated February 14, 2017, marked as record of Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust and kept and maintained by the Trump Organization. So out of the revocable trust, that is where Mr. Trump is the beneficiary, the Mr. Michael Cohen made a false entry. It says, however, so we know the specificity is a particular act on a particular day was specified in the indictment. You know what was not specified in this indictment? What was the other crime? You left it out. Now, is that something you can fix? But I'm just a simpleton. But look at this. The elements are not there. And then when I scroll down to the second count, falsifying business in the first degree, blah, 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 and elsewhere in 2017, intent to defraud and intent to commit another crime. So he had to both intend to defraud, it's got to be proven, intend to commit another crime, and aid and conceal the commission thereof. So they've got to prove that. Made and caused a false entry in the record business of the enterprise, specifically trust bearing voucher number 842457 and kept and maintained, etc. So he's got a specific voucher number as evidence as a false entry. But you know what he didn't include? What's the specific crime? Okay, you've got to, I would think you'd have to list both. To conceal this crime, he made this invalid entry. It's not there. Next one. Did a false entry, voucher number 842460. But no listing of any other crime. So to me, I would be like, listen, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that he disqualified for this felony in 175 1.010 because you're saying this ledger is false. Good luck, have fun proving that. It may be true, maybe not. You got a 50-50 chance. But I don't even need to look at it. I don't even need to consider whether it's false under this charge if there's no accusation, no claim of a particular crime that was supposed to be concealed. So, I'm not an expert in it. I haven't been in law school. I've been in law school libraries a lot, but I've got American Jurisprudence in my hand and United States Code annotated behind my head and somewhat into my head. But as just the reasonable mind, I'm going, that just seems unreasonable. So here we are. It's what it does? It makes for good back and forth factional wrangling on TV. In fact, the one thing about Preservative Talk Radio and Nougat Radio is there's an element that we bring that is not, let's say, typical. Even the shows that I see where there's lawyers making comments, they don't necessarily say the things that are necessary for the audience to make their own conclusions. They make conclusory statements because of the faction that they're trying to promote. And I see that, what's her name? I can't think of her first name. Congresswoman Green. And she's one who can rally like the public opinion on her particular faction and bent. And she's screaming for justice and stuff like that. And I think that's necessary. However, I'm not going to take her screaming for justice and take that mantle upon myself. I'm not going to do that for anybody. Whichever faction. It's not going to happen, I hope. My goal is to objectively look at the Constitution, the Bible, understand right and wrong. If it's not expressly stated in the Bible as right and wrong, my Creator has given me enough sense to figure it out, whether it's right or wrong. And likely, if I figure it out, I'll probably be able to find it in a revealed law and go, oh yeah, it's right there. It was already mentioned. I just didn't know where it said it. So what does this matter to you? I would think the important thing is to pray for the right thing, pray for justice. And one thing about former President Trump, particularly when he was running against Hillary Clinton, because I have certain knowledge about her waywardness and, from facts that I've been able to collect, like whatever you do, don't let her get in office. Now, Trump, we didn't know. We have no idea. He's just kind of the blowhard, what they call it, the mean tweets and all this kind of stuff. So it kind of seems to me like, before he became president, it's like a flim-flam man. He does TV shows and he's got this entertainment like motive. And I didn't know him before then, before I could see that stuff out in public. But I was not too personally captivated by either of them. Now, some of the things that he said that weren't mean tweets that I thought, well, if he pulls that off, I mean, he's got to be being a blowhard because people have said similar things in the past, but nobody really does them. Is he actually going to be able to pull off the things that he says? Well, amazingly, the guy pulled them off. Can I just tell you, I sat back and every time I heard the latest thing that President Trump did, it was great. I mean, I was laughing. It was like, look what this guy did. He just, the making Jerusalem, recognizing it as Israel's capital moving the consulate to Jerusalem. I mean, that is just bold. Let's do it. I'm the executive. This is my executive power. It's a good thing to do. Is there anything stopping us? Let's do it. And being from, he wasn't in the military. Now, he honors military service members, but the guy acts like a general. He acts like an admiral. He acts like the Commodore. He knows his authority, and he knows his mission, and he analyzes, and he knows what the right thing to do is, and he's got the power connected to his little finger when he points that things happen. And the goal is to make sure when you do that the right things happen. So I saw that in the military. There was some men, in particular, all the captains that I was familiar with were all men. And when they were on their game, that's exactly what they would do. When they knew their business, that's exactly what they would do. They would make quick decisions, but were educated, and it affected things. Everybody, 5,000 people in our battle group were blessed when the Commodore said, do this. And then we go back and we could analyze and we connect the dots, go, whoa, that was so good. And then I saw other people of the same rank not be effective that way, making political sycophant moves, right? Who am I going to schmooze? Okay, it might be, if we were in war, I might do something differently but we'll never know what they would have done in war because they were, hiding behind this political favors thing. Don't do political favors when the mission is to protect the security of the nation and do it with the lowest cost of life. Don't be playing that game. So I watch, and I'm thinking of one particular Commodore, Cosgriff, who became a 3-star admiral and did significant things, operational things for the Navy, and I think had the favor of the living God on his life. And it was a wonderful model of leadership. And he had the same sort of things that we saw with Donald J. Trump when he was the executive. He did what made sense, and he didn't worry about the political ramifications. He didn't play games. It was not a sycophant thing, because you can tell, because he had mean tweets. Now, I'm not in favor of that. You know me, my approach is going to be a softer touch. A soft answer averts wrath. Harsh words stir up strife. So I take the word of God as often as I can and apply it wherever I can, no matter the situation. But in the theme of this conversation today is the prosecutor prosecutable? As without reading the details of this in my hand, this American Jurisprudence, I discovered that it's very difficult to prosecute a prosecutor for malicious prosecution. Because let's just say the only way it could happen one way it could happen is if all these charges are found to be false or inappropriate or whatever it is. It's got to happen after the fact, and after the case is over, you can take what happened in the case and use that as evidence of a malicious prosecution. But it's a very hard thing to do, because if the prosecutor used a legitimate prosecutorial process, and having an indictment helps protect him, it's very unlikely a prosecutor is going to be prosecuted for malicious prosecution. That's a reality. And so we might not know about that. But what's important for us right now is we need to pray for our families, keep it local, make sure we're doing what's right in our household, and then we're going to influence our neighbor to do what's right, and that's going to influence their voting and considering who is it that's supposed to be the president of the United States. Is it Donald J. Trump or somebody else? Who is it supposed to be? And with regard to voting, what should we do? And let's have everything that we do be in faith, obedience, and sacrifice, and it's going to make a marvelous effect on our nation and our neighborhood. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. Send some comments or questions. Again, what I used was American Jurisprudence. You go to a law library and you can read this stuff. You can't highlight it, necessarily. What you can do is if there's a few pages that you really like, you can print it out. Most likely your law library will provide for it. And that's it. So